The Brexit Secretary has warned of a growing risk that MPs could prevent Britain from leaving the EU, but a senior Conservative has rejected reports that backbenchers are trying to seize control of Commons business. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has asked a standards panel to examine her communications with Alex Salmond during a government inquiry into his conduct. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called for an end to the row between America's allies in the Gulf. There have been further deaths caused by heavy snow in the Alps. A leading Conservative Remainer has dismissed as fantasy suggestions that a cross-party group of backbenchers is attempting to change parliamentary rules to try to delay Brexit. The newspaper reports were seized on by the Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay as he warned of a growing risk that MPs could frustrate the government's plan for leaving the EU if Tuesday's vote on Theresa May's deal was lost. As the Prime Minister issued a last-minute plea to MPs to back her proposals, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said he would call a no-confidence vote soon if Mrs May's current plan was rejected. Here's our political correspondent, Susanna Mendonça.
With just 2 days to go until crunch time for Theresa May's Brexit deal, the government has been suggesting that there is a plot by MPs to change the rules to give backbenchers control over government business in the House of Commons. The Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay told the BBC's Andrew Marr that there was greater uncertainty after the Speaker of the House, John Bercow's decision last week to allow MPs to change the parliamentary timetable.
The uncertainty in terms of what will happen in the House has increased. And so those on the Brexiteer side seeking ideological purity with the deal are risking Brexit because there is a growing risk that events could unfold in ways. So they're leaving the door ajar to ways that increase the risk to Brexit.
But a leading Conservative Remainer has told the BBC tonight that he is not aware of any plans to change Commons rules and that newspaper stories about backbench plots are just fantasy. The Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable, said if the government couldn't get its Brexit deal through, Parliament should take the lead.
Parliament will take control of this process, will insist that we pursue the option of no Brexit. It can happen in one of two ways. It can happen simply by cancelling Article 50, which I think would be resented by lots of people, or it can happen by Parliament saying, actually, we go back to the public to have the final say.
With the Speaker continuing to face criticism over his interventions last week, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has defended John Bercow.
What he's trying to do is ensure that MPs on all sides of the House, both sides of the House, have a chance to take part and propose in this, propose amendments and so on in this whole Brexit process. I think John Bercow has been a good speaker and the attacks on him are really unfair and unwarranted.
Mr Corbyn also reiterated his promise to call a vote of no confidence in the government at a time of the party's choosing. But he would not be drawn on precisely when he would try to topple Mrs May, saying only that it would be soon. The Prime Minister's team have admitted they face a challenging week. If they don't win, it's clear the challenges will be much greater.
The deal being put to MPs on Tuesday is on the terms the government has agreed with the EU for the UK's exit in 11 weeks' time and an outline of the future relationship. The constitutional expert Lord Hennessy said the next week would be an extraordinary page in the UK's history, as our political correspondent Vicky Young reports.
It's hard to find anyone in Westminster who thinks Theresa May will win Tuesday's vote. The government's still hoping for more reassurances from the EU on the terms of the UK's departure, especially the temporary nature of the so-called Northern Ireland backstop, designed to avoid the return of a hard border. But at the moment it feels like a case of damage limitation. Everyone's contemplating a plan B, but MPs can't agree on what that is. A controversial intervention by the Speaker last week showed how determined he is to make sure the Commons gets a say in what form Brexit should take, even if that means changing long-established rules. So an unpredictable political situation is now even more uncertain. On The World this weekend, the constitutional expert Lord Hennessy underlined the magnitude of the situation.
We're going to live through an extraordinary week, writing an extraordinary page of our history, but not one of us knows the words on that page, what we'll be reading on that page in 7 days' time. It is quite extraordinary what we will be distilling from the frenzy of this week. It's a multiple crisis. It's certainly on the rim of a constitutional crisis.
If Theresa May's plan is voted down, some believe there will be another referendum. Others insist the default legal position will stand and the UK will exit without a deal. Another group of MPs will push for Britain to stay in the European Economic Area. They can't all be right.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has referred herself to a standards panel over her actions during a government inquiry into her predecessor Alex Salmond. Ms Sturgeon said she'd been in contact with Mr Salmond while senior civil servants investigated allegations of sexual harassment against him. He strongly denies the claims. As Katie Hunter reports, the First Minister maintains she acted appropriately.
The First Minister said it was in the interests of the complainants that she should be examined under the ministerial code. Nicola Sturgeon said she'd met former First Minister Alex Salmond on 3 occasions and had spoken to him on the phone twice after sexual harassment allegations were made against him to the Scottish Government. On Tuesday, the Scottish Government's handling of the allegations against Mr Salmond was ruled unlawful by Scotland's highest civil court. Nicola Sturgeon said she had acted appropriately and in good faith throughout and in compliance with the ministerial code at all times, but understood it was important for Parliament and the wider public to be assured of that. Mr Salmond still faces a police investigation. He denies the allegations.
The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called for an end to the row between America's allies in the Gulf. He was speaking in Qatar before flying to Saudi Arabia on the latest stop of his tour of the Middle East. The trip has been dominated by attempts to explain President Trump's abrupt decision to pull US troops out of Syria. Barbara Plett-Usher reports from the Saudi capital, Riyadh.
One of the main themes of Mike Pompeo's trip is to rally support for the administration's central policy of isolating Iran and countering its backing of the likes of Hezbollah and Syria's President Assad. But the Americans have not been able to resolve an ongoing feud between Qatar and its Gulf neighbors. Shortly before this trip, Mr. Pompeo's envoy charged with the task admitted failure and resigned. In Doha, the Secretary of State said there needed to be a united front against Iran.
President Trump and I both believe the ongoing dispute in the region has dragged on too long, and the dispute benefits adversaries and harms our mutual interests.
Mr. Pompeo has also been defending President Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. He's called it a tactical change that wouldn't alter America's ability to take necessary military action against Islamist extremists. But there are many here who see it as evidence that the U.S. is retreating from the region. A senior member of the Saudi royal family, Prince Turki Al Faisal, told the BBC it was a very negative development.
The US's actions, from my perspective, is that it is going to further complicate the issue rather than find any solutions to it. And it will further entrench not only the Iranians, but also the Russians and Bashar al-Assad. So that, from that perspective, of course, it is a very negative development.
America's relations with Saudi Arabia are also complicated at the moment because of the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The U.S. Senate has blamed the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for the killing. The President and Secretary of State have not, but Mr. Pompeo said he would press the Crown Prince to ensure those responsible were held fully accountable.
At least 5 people have been killed as a result of unusually heavy snowfalls in the Alps this weekend. Severe weather has been linked to more than 20 deaths across Europe. Bethany Bell reports from the town of Kleinsell in the Austrian Alps.
Days of heavy snowfalls in the Alps have been taking their toll. In France, 2 employees at the Morillon ski resort were killed as they tried to carry out a controlled explosion to prevent avalanches. Last night, 3 skiers from Germany died in an avalanche in the resort of Lech in western Austria. Their bodies were found on a ski route that had been closed off because of the danger of major snowslides. A 4th person is still missing. Rescue workers have had to halt their search because it's too dangerous to continue. The risk of further avalanches is very high. Some ski resorts and mountain villages have had to be evacuated. Other areas are snowed in. Firefighters and soldiers are working round the clock to try to keep roads and roofs clear, but more heavy snow is forecast over the next few days.
Rival political parties in the Democratic Republic of Congo are being urged to form a national unity government following a disputed presidential election. The Southern African regional group SADC, which brings together 16 countries, said such an administration would promote peace. It also called for a recount of the votes. Our correspondent Andrew Harding reports from Johannesburg.
This is a highly significant intervention by the DRC's neighbours at a time when the disputed results of the presidential election are still being contested in the courts. The president of Zambia, Edgar Lungu, cited the strong objections to the provisional election results and said he and other regional leaders felt the best way forward was a negotiated political settlement and a government of national unity. He cited the example of similar deals in Zimbabwe and Kenya. In South Africa, the Foreign Minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, insisted that the legal process in the DRC should not be preempted and that outsiders should not attempt to force a settlement. But she also said a unity government could prove to be an acceptable compromise for a troubled country in desperate need of peace. SADC's intervention will be welcomed by some as a wise proposal to avoid further bloodshed, but others will see it as another weak and dangerous compromise that undermines African democracy and emboldens autocrats.
The Zimbabwean government has more than doubled the price of fuel in an attempt to tackle severe shortages that have led to long queues at petrol stations. Trade unions have expressed outrage and called for a nationwide strike tomorrow. Fuel companies in Zimbabwe say the government doesn't allocate them enough US dollars to import diesel and petrol in sufficient quantities to meet the demands. Tottenham are playing Manchester United in the Premier League's late match, and Saracens have qualified for the quarter-finals of Rugby Union's European Champions Cup. Rounding up the sport is Nicola McCarthy.
Well, let's head straight to Wembley, where Tottenham are hosting Manchester United in the Premier League. Rob Northam is there.
And it's Tottenham 0, Manchester United 1. There are 6 minutes left, and United's revival since the sacking of Jose Mourinho and the arrival of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer looks like continuing. It's been a pulsating match, United taking the lead just before half-time. Pogba's clever pass and Marcus Rashford's fine-angled finish. Spurs have had their chances. Kane and Dele Alli have frequently tested David De Gea in the United goal, but no equaliser has been forthcoming. Spurs 0, Manchester United 1.
Earlier, Everton won the mid-table battle with a 2-0 victory over Bournemouth at Goodison Park. In the Women's Super League, leaders Arsenal won 2-1 at home to champions Chelsea. They've been replaced at the top by Manchester City, who beat West Ham 3-1. Former South Africa captain Lucas Radebe has paid tribute to Phil Masinga, who died this morning at the age of 49 after battling cancer. Masinga played with Radebe at Leeds United between 1994 and 1996.
The country lost an individual, a legend that has inspired those who wants to be footballers, in this country, the young and up and coming. So which I think today it's sad and we're mourning the loss of a great legend.
In Rugby Union, two-time Champions Cup winners Saracens are in the quarter-finals after a bonus point 28-10 victory against Lyon. Glasgow, second in that group, beat Cardiff to also edge closer to the last 8. The top 2 meet next weekend. Meanwhile, Exeter kept alive their hopes of reaching the last 8 as they beat Castres.
The global beauty giant L'Occitane is to buy the British luxury skincare brand Elemis for £700 million. L'Occitane's chief executive said the acquisition marked a major step forward for his firm. Our business correspondent Joe Miller has more details.
As high street retailers have suffered, so have many traditional beauty concession stands. But Elemis has bucked the trend by building a lifestyle brand and promoting its luxury products online, as well as in hotels, airports, gyms and on cruises. The company has also gone from creating creams and cleansers to running spas and salons around the world. It says its therapists see more than 6.5 million clients a year. These strategies seem to have attracted L'Occitane, whose chief executive Reinhold Geiger praised Elemis for its broad appeal, which stretches across generations. The £700 million acquisition marks L'Occitane's largest purchase since it went public in 2010. While Elemis has been run by its British founders for almost 3 decades, it was sold more than 3 years ago to an American private equity group, which called the new sale a terrific outcome.
The headlines again. The Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay has warned of a growing risk that MPs could frustrate the government's plan for leaving the EU. But a senior Conservative Remainer has dismissed as fantasy suggestions that backbenchers are trying to seize control of Commons business. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called for an end to the diplomatic row between America's allies in the Gulf. While we've been on air, we've heard that 2 men have died in separate falls in the Mourne Mountains in County Down. BBC News.